strike the Loran C program. It's at the desk. It could be 1406. I'm not.
Is there any objection to setting aside the pending amendment?
Mr. President, reserving the right to object, if we could just check on the correct number of the amendment.
Clerk will check on the number.
Mr. President, pending me finding the right amendment, I suggest a quorum call.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Yes, unanimous consent that further proceedings under the quorum call be suspended.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, thanks to my crack staff, that amendment number is 1404. I ask for its immediate consideration and the pending amendment be set aside. 1406. Excuse me, 1406.
Without objection, the clerk will report on 1406.
Thank you.
The Senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain, proposes an amendment numbered 1406 to amendment number 1373 on page 75, line 15.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that further reading of the amendment be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, as I would imagine that my colleagues remember that several months ago, the President announced that there would be a number of significant cuts in spending in order to try to bring unnecessary and wasteful programs under control. And the President announced that there would be some $41 billion saved over the next decade, and that the administration, as part of its budget submission, recommended terminating or reducing 121 federal programs that were estimated to save the taxpayers $41 billion over the next decade. That announcement by the President was greeted with certainly applause and appreciation by most Americans, since we are amassing multi-trillion-dollar deficits. Unfortunately, it seems pretty clear that these budget cuts that the administration recommended terminating already are not being terminated. And we have had votes already on at least two of them, and now we're about to talk about another one that would achieve a savings of some $36 million in 2010 and $190 million over 5 years. Not a small amount of money, at least in the old days before we got into multi-trillion-dollar deficits. So what this amendment does, it seeks to strike the Loran C program. Now, in interest of full disclosure, Mr. President, Loran was around when I was in the Navy. So obviously, it's a pretty old program. And the President and the administration called it, quote, obsolete technology, unquote. And I certainly do agree. Now, the administration stated in its budget submission, and I have that somewhere, that, and I quote in its budget submission, the Loran C is a federally provided radio navigation system for civil marine use in U.S. coastal areas. The nation no longer needs this system because the federally supported civilian global positioning system, known to us as GPS, has replaced it with superior capabilities. As a result, Loran C, including recent limited technological enhancements, serves only the remaining small group of longtime users. It no longer serves any governmental function, and it is not capable as a backup for GPS. I want to point out again to my colleagues, that's not my view, and I will enumerate the number of government agencies that agree with that, but several federal agencies, including the Departments of Defense, Transportation, Homeland Security, already have backup systems for their critical GPS applications, and the termination of Loran C does not foreclose future development of a national backup system. It merely stops the outflow of taxpayers' dollars to sustain a system that does not now and will not, in its current state, serve as a backup to GPS. Pretty strong and pretty direct and pretty clear language. And obviously, the administration is proposing to terminate the terrestrial-based long-range radio navigation system, Loran C, operated by the U.S. Coast Guard, because it's obsolete technology. Accounting for inflation, this will achieve a savings of, as I mentioned, $36 million in 2010 and $190 million over 5 years. Now, again, I want to point out that this is one of 121 terminations or cuts that the President of the United States announced that the administration wanted done. And, of course, many Americans believed that they would be achieved. So far, we haven't done one. I'm sure we may, but we haven't done one. And in 2005, numerous federal agencies called for the termination of this program, as I mentioned earlier, including the Coast Guard. Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Transportation, representing the Federal Aviation Administration, and the Secretary of Homeland Security, representing the Coast Guard, all signed in October 2005 a report that stated the Department of Defense has determined that Loran is no longer needed as a positioning, navigation, or timing aid for military users. And, quote, with respect to aviation, the FAA has determined that sufficient alternative navigational aids exist in the event of a loss of GPS-based services, and therefore, Loran is not needed as a backup navigation aid for aviation users. And, quote, with respect to maritime safety, the United States Coast Guard has determined that sufficient backup are in place to support safe maritime navigation in the event of a loss of GPS-based services, and therefore, Loran is not needed as a backup navigational aid for maritime safety. It isn't a new debate, Mr. President. It isn't a new debate. You know, once programs come into being, they're almost impossible to kill. And we may not be able to kill this one. The votes so far have indicated there certainly isn't a harbinger of success. But remarkably, this is a GAO report, the U.S. General Accounting Office, dated September 18th, 1981. September 18th, 1981. 1981. And the report states, DOT, Department of Transportation, should terminate further Loran C development and modernization and exploit the potential of the Navstar Global Positioning System, i.e. GPS. Remarkable. 1981. 1981. So the report goes on, and I won't waste too much time going into it, but the GAO obviously found that the Coast Guard, we have completed a follow-up review on our March 21st, 1978 report. The report concluded that the Department of Defense's DoD satellite-based Navstar GPS could be a national asset, could replace many existing navigation systems at substantial savings. The report considered these systems, including the Department of Transportation's Loran C system, to be unneeded by the early 1990s and cautioned against further investment in Loran C. It also recommended that the Secretary of Transportation become more involved in the GPS program to ensure the timely availability of low-cost civil receivers. Obviously, we have low-cost civil receivers. So, beginning in 1981, and here we are 28 years later, trying to terminate a program that literally every agency of government is trying to kill. But will we succeed? Again, the votes so far don't really indicate that. I also, Mr. President, I'd like to mention yesterday there was an article by Mr. Walter Larkin, and says, quote, Dems ignore Obama's cuts. Congressional Democrats are largely ignoring President Obama's $19.8 billion in budget cuts. The president proposed axing dozens of programs that he said were inefficient or ineffective, but members of the House Appropriations Committee are including the money for them. Over here, on this side of the Capitol, we're doing the same thing. Associated Press, Congress largely ignoring Obama budget cuts. Lawmakers have yet to deal with most controversial proposed cuts. Obama proposed the cuts last month after what he promised would be a line-by-line scrub of the federal budget to counter Republican charges that he's spending the country into too much debt. The House has already rejected his effort to kill a $400 million program that helps states with the cost of incarcerating criminal illegal immigrants, and a Homeland Security spending bill up for a House vote this week keeps in place the World War II-era Loran Sea maritime navigation system that Obama wanted to axe, even though it's been rendered obsolete by the modern global positioning system. The Homeland Security measures also preserve $12 million in security grants for bus systems. That's the one that died, the amendment we tried to kill yesterday, that died 5147, and $40 million in grants to local governments for emergency operations centers. That one was not approved today by 60 to 38. All told, lawmakers in both parties, California Republicans were a driving force in preserving the state criminal alien assistance program, have combined to preserve more than $750 million worth of cuts suggested by Obama. So, Politico, Democrats make show of budget cuts. That was on June 23rd, with growing public concern about the deficits and billions still backed up in President Obama's economic recovery program. Just how did Democrats sell another 8% increase in discretionary spending this summer? Some of the terminations are less than advertised, and it goes on and on. So, first of all, I want to say again, I applaud the president's commitment to cutting some of these programs. I spoke out at the time when he said they would go line by line, when he said that they would have budget cuts that were significant, that there would be billions of dollars saved in unwanted, unnecessary programs and spending. Why don't we here in Congress get that message? So I would urge the president, if we continue on this path, and we probably will. I mean, I've been around this body long enough to see where the votes are. The appropriators have the control here, that I'm going to strongly suggest that the president start vetoing some of these bills. By the way, something that the previous administration should have done and the previous president should have done. I came to the floor in the last administration and fought against these earmarked pork barrel projects in the last administration, just as I am with this one. Yesterday, I offered an amendment to strip funding for a program the administration had declared unnecessary and sought to terminate. The amendment was defeated, and only 12 members of the president's party supported the amendment seeking to implement the administration's recommendation. When are we going to get serious about making some tough choices around here? So I know that there are other amendments in line. Let me sum up again, Mr. President. This is a system of an aid to navigation for ships at sea and in rivers and lakes, etc., that long ago has been replaced by a thing called GPS, Global Positioning Systems. We have them in our cars. They're easily available to be bought at very low price at most any of our stores and outlets around the country. And I'm sure that you could draw a scenario where somehow satellites all fall from the sky, and that that somehow we can be deprived of Loran C. That is sheer foolishness. But if we don't kill this program, which was recommended to be terminated by a GAO in September of 1981, I think it's pretty obvious we're not going to be able to reduce or terminate funding for any program once it gets into production and once it gets its sponsors here in the Congress of the United States. So I strongly recommend that my colleagues understand that we just can't keep spending this kind of money. We just can't do it. We're laying a terrible burden on our children and our grandchildren. And this is some $36 million just for next year, $190 million for the next 5 years. And for anybody who has the slightest and rudimentary understanding of what GPS provides and how obsolete this system is willful ignorance. So I urge my colleagues, let's for a change stand up for the American taxpayer. Let's stand up for the taxpayer and our children and our grandchildren. In this era of $10 trillion debts and $1 trillion plus deficits, does $36 million in 2010 and $190 million over 5 years matters? I think it matters in that we ought to at least sometimes stop business as usual. People are not being able to stay in their homes. They're not keeping their jobs. Unemployment is all-time high. And we're going to waste another $36 million. How many people could stay in their homes? How many people could we employ in small businesses? How many people could educate their kids with this $36 million just for next year? There's something wrong here. There's something wrong here that we continue to spend like this when America is going through the toughest recession in our history. And time after time, we come to the floor and we try to terminate obsolete programs. We try to stop the wasteful and unnecessary pork barrel spending and earmarks. And what do we get? We get majority votes against it. So don't be surprised, I say to my colleagues, when the Tea Parties get bigger around the country. Don't be surprised when more and more Americans register as independents because they think both sides of the aisle are guilty. Don't be surprised when Americans, in every way that they can, express their extreme dissatisfaction with our spending habits and the corruption that exists as a result of it. It's time we started standing up for the American people and not the special interests that are the sponsors of Loran C and so many wasteful and unnecessary programs that we continue to see increases in spending when every other American family literally is having to tighten their belts and decrease their spending if they're able to spend it all. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Washington.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. President. And I want to thank the Senator from Arizona for offering this amendment. Indeed, Loran C was established after World War II as a navigational tool for our mariners and aviators, and the President has proposed to terminate Loran C stations on October 1st, 2009, with the justification that the federally supported Civilian Global Positioning System, GPS, that we're all familiar with, is now the primary navigational tool, and the Loran C is no longer needed by the armed forces or by the transportation sector or by the nation's security interests. The Office of Management and Budget has also told us that many agencies, including the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Defense do, as the Senator stated, already have backup systems for GPS. Mr. President, I want to set the record straight about what this committee mark does have in it that's before us. It does provide for the orderly termination of Loran C beginning January 4th, 2010. So the underlying bill does terminate the Loran C program, and it does so in a way to allow the Coast Guard the time to inform the public and provide for the orderly termination of that program. So the committee bill continues operations of Loran C until January 4th, 2010. Now, Mr. President, and then the program is terminated. Now, contrary to the sponsor's statement yesterday, there is not $35 million in this bill for Loran C. This bill does, as it's presented, have $18 million. Now, the President, in his request, did include no funding to pay for the cost to terminate these stations. According to the Coast Guard, who's provided us information, they do need this funding to remove the high-value equipment and the electronics hazardous material. They need it to remediate the environmental concerns, and they do need the money to fund a variety of measures to secure the sites until they are fully decommissioned. So this money is not to continue the operation of Loran C. It is to terminate it in a way that is proper and make sure that while we're removing this commitment, these stations, we're doing it in a responsible way. So what we do in the committee, Mark, is to make sure that the Coast Guard doesn't have to take away money from critical missions, their search and rescue mission, or their drug interdiction, or their marine safety, or their environmental compliance to terminate these programs. But we did include funding so that the Loran C stations could be done shut down responsibly. Now, Mr. President, the administration has sent us a statement of administrative policy I would like to include in the record at this time.
Objection.
And it says, the administration appreciates the committee's support for termination of the Loran C radio navigation system. The administration supports the committee's aim to achieve an orderly termination through a phased decommissioning beginning in January 2010, and the requirement that certifications be provided to document that the Loran C termination will not impair maritime safety or the development of possible GPS backup capabilities or needs. So the administration has said that indeed the committee is complying with what they have asked us to do, which is to terminate the Loran C program. So, Mr. President, I just have to say that the aim of the amendment that has been offered is unclear to me, as what it actually does is strip the Coast Guard of the authority that we have provided in the underlying bill to terminate a program that will indeed save the taxpayers $36 million a year. So, Mr. President, the way the amendment is written, I oppose it because it will take away what the committee has written in here to terminate the Loran C program as the President has requested in a responsible way, to do it in a way that we terminate, that we deal with the mitigation that needs to be done when you remove equipment like this. And the amendment that has been offered will actually strip the Coast Guard of the authority to do just that. So, Mr. President, the committee bill does what the senator is asking to do. It does it in a timely and responsible way and does terminate the Loran C program. And I urge our colleagues to support the committee amendment that does it in a responsible way. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Arizona.
Mr. President, the distinguished chairperson left out a couple of items. One, it'll still cost an additional $18 million if the program is terminated by January 4th, 2010. The interesting thing also, when you read the bill on pages 75, 76, and 77, is a list of caveats that have to be achieved in order for that to happen. Now, how many times have I seen around here a determination made that they will terminate a program if the following criteria are met? And the limitations in the bill are termination will not adversely impact the safety of maritime navigation. The system is not needed as a backup to the GPS or any other federal navigation. If the commandant makes a certification, the commandant doesn't have to make a certification, I say to the senator from Washington. The Coast Guard has already said they don't want it. It needs no certification. Not later than 30 days after such certification, pursuant to subsection B, the commandant shall submit to the Committee on Appropriations of the Senate House of Representatives a report setting forth a proposed schedule for the phased decommissioning of the Loran C system infrastructure. In the event of the decommissioning of such infrastructure in accordance to subsection C. If the Commandant makes the certification described in subsection B, the Secretary of Homeland Security, acting through the Commandant of the Coast Guard, may, notwithstanding any other provision of law, sell any real or property, etc., by directing the Administrator of General Services to sell such real property, etc., etc. So, after the completion of such activities, the unexpended balances shall be available for any other environmental compliance and restoration. Why not stop it now? Why not stop it now? Why spend an additional $18 million? And why open this up? Since 1981, we've been trying to kill it. Why open it up for additional period of time when clearly this system needs to stop? So I say to the, and with all due respect to the senator from Washington, let's stop it now. You can stop it now. We know it can be stopped now, and we don't have to spend an additional $18 million on the program. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Washington.
the senator and I are on the same page. We want to terminate this program. It's the responsible thing to do. But we have a responsibility as oversight to make sure that we do it in a way that mitigates any problems that are out there. We have high-value equipment. We have electronic hazardous materials that are out there. The Coast Guard, whoever's responsible, has to remediate the environmental concerns, and they need to secure these sites where the Loran Seas are. That is what this funding is for, to make sure it's done responsibly. If we do not provide the funds in this amendment, the Coast Guard will be required to take the money to do that out of other very important missions that many of us care about, whether it's search and rescue or drug interdiction or marine safety or threats of terrorism. We do not want the Coast Guard to take away that money to do that. And, Mr. President, I want to specifically say again, the amendment, the way it is written before us, strikes the language that the President requested to provide for the orderly termination by providing authority to sell the Loran Sea assets. If this amendment passes, they will not be able to sell the Loran Sea assets and thereby save taxpayer dollars. So, Mr. President, I understand where the senator's coming from. I know his past concerns about this program. We are going to shut it down. That's what this amendment does. The Commandant, who is in our language being asked to certify, goes at the behest of the President, as the senator from Arizona well knows. The President has said he wants the program shut down, and that's what this committee is trying to do in a responsible way to save the taxpayer dollars in the long run, and specifically to be able to sell the Loran Sea assets so that the taxpayers can regain their money at the end of the day. I yield the floor.
Mr. President,
Senator from Oklahoma.
in 2007, I offered this direct amendment. We spent 3 hours on it on the floor. Everybody agreed that we needed to get rid of this program then. We had some concerns. The thing I don't understand is why we're waiting the extra 5 months to shut down the program. There's nobody that needs this program. That 5 months, just that 5 months of continuing the program cost the American taxpayers $18 million. So if, in fact, we're going to shut down the program, I'd like to understand the logic of turning it down January instead of October 1st. If the Coast Guard, first of all, nobody's using this now. Nobody's using this. If they can't notify in 3 months all the people, which is 0, that are using this today, and that it's going to take them, the other question is why does it take $35 million? Where's the backup detail? Where's the backup detail that shows what the cost will be? Maybe it's $18 million.
It's 18.
So why does it take $18 million? There's only 7 stations left. And we're talking about facilities that are smaller than these 4 desks. Tell me how it takes $2.5 million per buoy to shut them down. Only from Washington would it take that much money. Where's the basis for the knowledge that says it takes $18 million?
Well, some gentleman yield for a question.
I'd be happy to yield to the senator.
Senator from Arizona.
I'm sure the gentleman understands that from the Office of Management and Budget that was submitted to the Congress, budget of the U.S. government fiscal year 2010, it says the administration is proposing to terminate and achieve a savings of $36 million in 2010. And now the senator from Washington is obviously contradicting what we were told by the administration, which is what we wanted, and how it could cost $18 million, as you say, to shut down 7 sites and them not be allowed to sell off valuable assets, of course, is foolishness. Of course, the government sells off assets that are extraneous assets all the time without the permission or the need to have legislation. Is the senator aware of that?
I would tell the senator from Washington, first of all, I do appreciate that you are attempting to shut this down, and I thank you for it. It's been long overdue. But I do question the amount of money it takes to shut this down. And we know all the bureaucracies always want more money than what's necessary, and you've allowed in this bill whatever's not used, they can plow back into anything that they want to use. Why would we not terminate it at the fiscal year? Every month that we're running, it's costing $3 million, $3 to $4 million to operate these. $3 to $4 million. I know it doesn't seem like a lot when we're going to have a $1.8 trillion budget deficit this year, but I don't understand why we wouldn't do it. I appreciate the fact that you are doing it. I think it can be done for a lot cheaper, and I think it can be done sooner, and I would hope that the committee would consider that. With that, I'd yield the floor.
Clerk will